Claudia Cardinali is strategy director for personal branding agency Great Influence, where she works closely with CEOs, founders, and leadership teams on their public image. Claudia has worked to build the personal brands of political party leaders, Sunday Times best-selling authors, Premier League football players, journalists, and unicorn entrepreneurs. She was awarded a LinkedIn Top Voice last year, so if you're not following Claudia, please do. And she's gained an audience of over 65,000 followers and has become has built her career by shaping her thoughts on the platform, particularly around becoming a manager and employee-generated content, which is something that I particularly want to dive into. So, Claudia, first of all, big warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenny. What a lovely intro.
Well, you are a superstar. So I want to, first of all, just for those listening, why this is so relevant is I know that you work with a number of agency owners on building their personal brand. And before I get into the detailed questions, can you just talk to me about why people actually want to build a personal brand? What's the meaning of it and why is it beneficial?
100%. That's a great place to start. So people come to us for a lot of different reasons. Everyone we work with is very different stages of their business and what they want to get out of it. For most people, it's that they're looking to generate new clients, build a client pipeline. And I think a really, really strong and I think different way for a lot of brands to do that is through the founder. That happens typically anyway, is that people tend to come through there, just through their general network. But I think we're looking at it in a much more intentional way. So how do we help the founder of a business grow their network and reputation less passively and way more intentionally to create that pipeline funnel, I guess. Again, people come to us if they're thinking about raising investment for their business, if they're looking to acquire another business, if they're looking for someone to acquire them. And I think, again, it's just being really conscious and intentional about how you're showing up in the world as the leader of a business, how people are perceiving you, how those leads are coming in and where they're coming into. Because I think so many conversations happen with founders, other founders, potential clients, potential investors, etc. naturally anyway, and they're the kind of circles that they're moving in. And we're just trying to build that in a space that is compounding, I guess, and helps people kind of maintain that level of relevance and visibility in a way that isn't just kind of like flippant or what relies on kind of like a one-on-one connection. Essentially what we're trying to do is like build their profile and distribute them at scale so that they can build in a much more effective and efficient way.
The reason I think people should take note of this, Claudia, I'm going to mention, is because I know that probably one of the most well-known agency owners who built their personal brand, probably the most successful, particularly in the UK, if not the world, is Stephen Bartlett. So he was the owner of Social Chain, which was a social media agency. And I think just for the audience, just explain the connection between Great Influence and Stephen Bartlett.
Yeah, so Ash, who is the brilliant founder of Great Influence, used to work with Stephen Bartlett back when he was at Social Chain. So Ash filmed the first couple of episodes of Diary of a CEO, worked with Stephen to take him from like very beginning to the first followers that he had across multiple platforms. I can't take any of the credit for the Stephen Bartlett brand of today. He has an amazing team that do an incredible job. But I think the really interesting part that Great Influence and Ash obviously played in that was like the kind of 0 to 1 element. And I think that the work that we do with a lot of founders now is that early stages of, okay, how do they create that pipeline and create that initial visibility for themselves as agency owner to the benefit of their business. And I think that's what Ash did so well initially with Stephen and Social Chain, was that the kind of like early days visibility of putting him on the map, I guess, which is what we're trying to replicate now with the people that we work with.
Amazing. Okay, so there's the reason to believe, the reason to listen. I want to dive a little bit deeper into something that you shared recently on LinkedIn, which was a video that sparked a lot of conversations about employees as influencers. Mm-hmm. So what, first of all, inspired you to talk about this? Because it also looked very natural, as if you were sort of getting it all out. You'd obviously been thinking about it for a long time. So what inspired you?
So I think it's really interesting because I have, I guess, like a double vested interest in this, in that we typically work with founders and CEOs, but we also do some work with kind of like C-suite leadership teams. So multiple people in a company and how they can show up in a bit of a different way as leaders. But then I also guess I have the like personal experience of working for a company. I'm not the founder, but building my own personal brand has been like insane for my career, and it's benefited me and the business in so many positive ways. And I think that we're starting to enter an era of, still in an era of like founder led marketing, but what I think is happening is this kind of shift to companies being much more community led. And that's happening with the shift from influencers to kind of like people within the brand communities that are now becoming part of like marketing efforts and initiatives. So we're shifting from like one-off influencer promo posts to communities that are actually invested and purchasing from brands that are becoming the advocates. And for me, the next natural shift that I'm starting to see happen a lot more with very forward-thinking companies is that they're starting to think about how the people that they employ and the people that they hire can show up as advocates for the brand. And for me, that's a really interesting kind of shift and pattern, because I think companies spend so much time, energy, money, and investment in finding great talent. And I think it's a really unique and innovative way to tap into those already ambassadors for the brand. And also it benefits them. So you're showing that you're investing in them and their career and how they can grow, but you're also getting a real investment in the brand as well, if they're kind of like putting their ideas out into the world and showcasing how much of a great person they are to have on the team, but also how great your company is as well. And I think I've seen that firsthand in my role at Great Influence and how much I have personally benefited from sharing my ideas with the world, the connections that I've made, the network that I've built. And also the really interesting thing is the impression that I'm now able to make on clients. And I think for most or a lot of agencies, there'll be a system where someone very senior is the kind of like mouthpiece or funnel for new business. And I've heard it so many times where a client comes in, they deal with one person, and then they want to work with that person again and again and again, and they don't want to be handed off to someone else in the team. And I think that the benefit that I've had of doing this is that I can go into meetings knowing that if someone then goes onto my LinkedIn page, which is where I tend to share most of my ideas, the impression that they will get of me is that hopefully I know what I'm talking about, but also that I am very, very invested in the work that I do. So much so that I'm willing to commit to showing up publicly repeatedly and try and work out like constantly how to be better at my job. So when we're in a situation where new work comes in, I'm working with a new client, they're not thinking that they're getting handed off to anyone. Like hopefully what I'm trying to convince them of is to shift them into a way of thinking of, I want to work with you because I've seen the work that you do. I know how invested you are in it, and that I don't feel like I'm being handed off or given a second-rate person to work with. Not that that's the case in any agency by any means, but it's that initial impression of, okay, we're passing the baton on to someone who is not only going to continue this work, but is also going to add significant value. And I think that must happen a lot in agencies where one person brings new clients in, and then that person, they build a relationship with someone, they trust that person, they like that person. And for me, I'm thinking like, how do I continue that of someone that comes in to Great Influence as a new client or even existing client? How do I continue to build that relationship with them when I'm not necessarily speaking to them every minute of the day? And for me, a really, really good way to build that visibility and trust is to constantly share my ideas, because they can see something that we can either discuss at a later date, or it's something that we've been talking about behind the scenes. And then it's like, no, I believe in this so much that I'm willing to share my voice publicly on it. So yeah, for me personally, it's definitely been very beneficial. But then also for the clients that we have in a more corporate space, having that visibility. So we work with Booking.com, who are a 20,000 person business across multiple continents. We're a team, Great Influence is a team of about 5, so slightly different ends of the scale. But for me, it's still beneficial to both, because the Booking.com version, you also have the added layer of it becomes a bit of an internal communication tool. I imagine the leaders don't have the chance to speak to every single person in their team every day, but then they create this touch point where people can feel like they're building a relationship with them because they're constantly seeing what they're like putting out into the world, where they are for one, what they're involved with, what they're working on, how they're thinking. And I think for me, it also then turns into a bit of a tool that's able to attract potential new hires as well, because not only are you thinking clients think, I want to work with that person, potential hires are also thinking, they look like a really inspiring person to work with or work for. So you kind of have that double win of potentially new business saying that they want to work with you, but also internal hires potentially wanting to work with you as well. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No, but listen, you've just rattled off numerous benefits to doing this, right? And I was scribbling down everything that you were saying, the lack of this handing off to another team when you've won a piece of business, the instant payback that you get personally. People have seen you and they can see that you've spread your thoughts and you've got more of a peer-to-peer relationship, like rather than I don't know you, you have to prove yourself. The internal comms aspect of it, and then also with hiring and recruitment. I mean, we've scratched the surface on the benefits. People listening to this might think, well, with Claudia's particular example, it's okay for her because it's a bit meta because they sell personal branding. So it would
Yep,
be naturally
makes
Claudia's.
sense.
Makes sense. Can you share some examples, either of who you're working with, you don't have to name names, or companies that you've seen in the agency space? And before you say that, the reason I was so excited about getting you on, when you posted that initial video, I already thought of at least 5 people that are doing this in an account management role. And I shared your video and I tagged them and I said, these are the account managers that are doing it really well. So it's happening, but please give me your examples of this concept in the agency space.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. There's like founder-led marketing. We work with some brilliant agency founders, Becky Sims at Reflect Digital, Charlotte Pierce at Inkpact. We worked with Andrew Dobby at Made Brave for a while, and again, him and his team do a brilliant job of like sharing the work and also sharing about the culture. And I think for me, that's such a big part of doing this is like you create a bit of a glass box environment where people can see not only what it's like to work there, but also the like get a bit of a glimpse into how it works if they were to become part of the business. And for me, I think, especially in the agency world, like everyone does something a bit different and how they work is a bit different. And I think that, again, you're trying to build that relationship and build that element of, I'm really invested and interested in how this specific agency works and the work that they do, because it feels really aligned to me and my company and my brand. And I think by sharing those snippets of not only the results of the work, but also how you get there. And I think because there are so many agencies that work in different ways, it's almost like you're looking for that like unique thing that you can bring that maybe no one else can. And I think that for me, the founder-led marketing, so Becky Sims at Reflect Digital, it has an amazing business, and it has so many different elements to it. And I think having her as that kind of like mouthpiece and leading and almost setting the example for the way that the company behaves and the quality of work they deliver, and also what she's interested in, is that you learn so much about the culture of the company just by learning more about her. And I think that you can create multiple touch points to kind of reflect, okay, this element is kind of talking about the business and the results. And I think something that I think people go a little bit awry on, not necessarily wrong, but they think that every single thing that they talk about should be promoting the business. Like, this is something that we've done, these are the results, work with us. And again, this is something we've done, these are results, work with us. And I think by doing that, sometimes you actually dilute the effect of it, because it turns into a bit of a like promotional, not spammy, but like on the cusp of, I just want to learn a little bit more about you. I want to get to know you a bit better, as opposed to constantly hearing about results, results, results. I think that should be an element of it. I think that should always be about 10 to 20% of it, depending on what kind of phase of the business that you're in. But I think for me, it's thinking about how can you use personal branding and showing up on social media as a way to build relationships. And you create almost like a bit of a mosaic. You create all these touch points that then build into a bigger picture. And for me, I'm always thinking about the bigger picture and how you can create different touch points within that reflects exactly who you are as a person and a business. And I think brands that do it really well in terms of like founder led and then also kind of trickles down to the team, obviously Stephen Bartlett and Flight Studio. For me, I'm really interested in how the team show up. And I think they've done a really, really good job. I was speaking to Grace Andrews, marketing director, the other week, and I think they've done a really good job of kind of identifying people that reflect different parts of the business. So you have the marketing element of it, you have the product element of it, you have someone in the experimentation team talking about the things that they're doing there. And if I was an agency thinking about how to replicate something like that, I think it's really important to understand who wants to do it and who is kind of thinking about doing it already, because so many things that I see are around like almost like how do we get our teams to show up more? And my immediate thought is like you can't force them. If they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. At the end of the day, it's their channel, it's their name that's attached to it. If they're not bought in initially, then I think you kind of have to just put them on ice for now and focus on the people that are invested and understand the value of it. I think there's a way to kind of like get people to feel empowered enough to do it for themselves. But I think like forcing people for me is just absolutely the wrong way to go about it. I think a really good place to start is identify like one or two leaders in the team that can really own kind of like an expert niche in the industry that they're kind of representing, and encourage them to create an environment where people feel safe to share their thoughts. For me, that's the place that I would always start, is that people either need to feel like they have permission or they need to feel like that they're in a safe enough environment that people aren't trying to catch them out, or there's not going to be fingers pointed and there's not going to be blame, and they're actually, whether like financially or another way, rewarded for the work they're doing. Even just we've identified that you're doing this and a round of applause and we think you're doing a great job goes a really long way in something like this, I think. And I think that recognition of identifying the people that are taking it into their own hands a little bit and choosing to post on social because they know it's beneficial to them, round them up and put them in a room and say, we've seen that you're doing this, we think you're doing a really good job, we just want to say well done, and is there anything that we can do to support you from here on out? And I think from there, I would then think about how you identify as a business what you need those people to drive. So for example, if I use myself as an example here, previously in my role before this, I just started managing a team. Actually, Jenny was one of the first people that I spoke to when I started managing a team at Great Influence. And at that time, it was kind of my role to make the team feel confident in the work that they were doing. So if you look back through my post on LinkedIn, what I was talking about was becoming a manager, what I was learning, the kind of like development that my own career was going on. And in my head, I was thinking, I hope that the team can see how invested I am in learning about this, because I want them to feel like I'm trying really hard to be a good manager for them. And also I was learning about it as well. And I was very transparent in doing that. But I was in the back of my mind thinking about how does this benefit Great Influence as a business? Now my role has shifted to become more client focused and how we think about getting new business. So you'll see reflected in my posts, like what I'm talking about has shifted, and I'm talking about employee generated content, and I'm talking about founders building their personal brands because it's related back to a business goal. So again, if you're thinking about implementing this in your teams, those leaders that you've identified that are now starting to share their thoughts with the world and publicly post their opinions, I would think about how you can then tie that back to the business, whether it is like a new business pipeline that you need to drive, or it's that you're going on a big hiring push and you need the culture to seem like something that people would want to join. Have those conversations really transparently with the leaders in your team, because they've already been intuitive enough to realize that actually publicly sharing their thoughts is a really good thing. So they'll definitely be intuitive enough to understand the value that they can bring to the business. They just need clarity on knowing exactly what it is that they need to drive.
Wow. Yeah, that was a masterclass, wasn't it? I think anyone listening to this with with any sense of where this future is going for agencies thinks that this is a good idea. I mean, I can't think why you wouldn't. But on that thought, obviously we have people thinking, yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. You said
Yeah.
something really, really key. First of all, let's just reflect on what you said. You know, this can benefit owners, employees themselves that are being the thought leaders, their teams, and also customers, potential prospects. So it's win-win-win. But going back a step, you said it's important that that person wants to do this. And I think it's probably a bit like taking a giant leap forward for an agency maybe listening to this that can see the potential benefit, but maybe the agency leader has never done anything like this before, is worried that the
Yeah.
employee might start posting something. And that could be a detrimental cycle in the fact that the employee might sense that fear and the potential finger pointing and they don't feel confident. And so the whole thing goes a bit flat. So to give the agency owner the confidence, would you suggest any kind of first steps to ease into this?
Yeah, 100%. I think the absolute first thing is like guardrails and clarity. And I think a question I get asked so often is like, what if someone says something wrong or that reflects badly on the agency? And for me, I always think, well, they should know exactly what it is. If they're going to put a foot wrong, they know what that looks like. And I think that comes from a very, very candid conversation initially from senior leadership, agency owners, whoever it is, that says, okay, this is the best foot forward that we need to put for the business. This is what we want people to see us as. This is how we want to be represented. And it's the same with like any brand guidelines. You can have the same thing in my mind in terms of personal branding and how you want to show up in the world. But I think it has to be clear because you're starting to bring in people's personal reputations and they're suddenly being attached to the brand, which is a mutual benefit. But also, I completely understand that the waters are a bit muddied. So for me, like complete upfront clarity of like, this is what we're trying to achieve by doing this. This is like the value that we think we can bring to the business. Even like a literal like pros and cons list of like, this is what we do talk about, this is what we don't talk about. And I think it can be that clear. Because for me, like great influence operates in a culture of like complete transparency and complete trust in terms of like we all know the things that we want to show up as. We all understand the business goals and what we're trying to achieve. We're then given the trust and autonomy to create in a way that feels authentic to us. And I think there has to be that mutual trust of, okay, we've hired you, we've been through a rigorous hiring process and vetting process of sometimes 10 million interviews and assessment centers and tests. So you should trust that person implicitly to be a representative of your brand because they do it every day to clients. So for me, there's no reason why you couldn't then do it on social media or however you choose to show up, speaking on stages, on podcasts, whatever it is. But I think there has to be that mutual understanding on both parts of exactly what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's a step that so many businesses miss because they're worried that their team will think that they don't trust them to show up. And then people in the team are worried that they shouldn't be doing it because the company, it's them, not the company. And are they leading from ego as opposed to like trying to drive something for the brand? I think it just has to be a really candid, honest conversation. And I think for me, I guess the other two sides of it are if you're a team thinking about wanting to get your employees to do it more, I think you have to inspire and empower rather than force and coerce. And I think from a personal side, if you're thinking about doing it, you have to help the business understand the value to them as much as to you. And you have to make it clear that, yes, I think the thing is like, of course, there's a benefit to you personally because you are building your own network and reputation within that. But as long as you're tied to that business, it will positively benefit them as well.
Do you find that those leaders in businesses, this kind of strategy works better, let's say, because they are the leaders that have a personal brand strategy and a goal and they are driving it? Do you think they're more open to encouraging their teams? It might be a bit of an obvious question, but I'm just kind of thinking, I know some leaders that don't put themselves out there. Perhaps they're not exploring personal branding as a route to increase their business. And therefore, I kind of feel sorry for an employee of that business that might be itching to raise their personal brand. So have you found that there's a pattern?
Yeah, I think for me, every conversation that I've had with someone that's a bit more senior that's kind of thinking about this, it's actually harder because you already have a reputation and you're already showing up in the world in a certain way, and it's something new. And you're not that you're putting your reputation on the line, but it's you have to start from zero a little bit. And I think that's quite daunting for senior people. And I completely understand that because you're dipping your toe in an area that you're an expert over here, but maybe you're not an expert here yet. But for me, the quicker that you can get those to match up, the better. And it's always going to be a trickle down effect of if you see senior people doing it, you're more likely to feel like, oh, okay, I know they do it and it's safe for them. So if it's safe for them, then it's safe for me. And I think that even if you're doing it in a stripped back way, like showing up once or twice a month still gives those people that are early in their career and understand the value of it and maybe feel a bit more confident in doing it because they're trying to build their reputation. They're still in the earlier phases. But I think, honestly, I think it has to come from the top because it comes back to that like safe feeling, and it's a hard thing to do, and it's very, very public, obviously. And I think that it has to come, yeah, it has to come from leadership. And I'm not saying that they have to go all guns blazing like from the off. And I get that maybe it will be a bit tentative initially, but if you're going to set the tone for a business and you're going to ask all of your team to start doing it, like for me, I'm always like a lead by example. And I think that, yeah, if I would never ask someone else to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself. And I think it has to be the same for this.
Interesting. So just before I ask you about the criteria for not doing it. One quick question. You laid out some steps there, ways to think about it. You talked about guardrails. You talked about having a candid conversation, treating this as much like corporate guidelines to what you can and can't say and things like that, being really clear. Do you, with companies perhaps that are already doing this and it's successful, do they have more formalized contracts in place with employees? Or do they have some kind of content plan that's agreed? Is it as structured as that?
I think it depends. I think that for me, it will always be, it's my name that's out there. As much as I'm attached to the business, it's still my reputation that I'm putting on the line. And I'd say the same to anyone else. So I think that, again, we're in the very early stages of like figuring this out. I think a world exists where it could be very similar to kind of influencer contracts. And it becomes very valuable for employees to have an audience that they bring with them to a company. And then essentially they're monetizing that audience, but in a different way. So I think that for some companies that could work. For me, I think it's very much about the autonomy element of it. And again, if it's your name, I think you should always have the autonomy over whether to say yes or no to something. I think it has to come from like fundamentally inspiring your team to not just become someone that posts about your company, but to become like a public advocate for the brand. And I think if companies have the mindset switch of, like I see it so often, like how do we get a team to post more? And I think that's just the wrong way of thinking about it. You have to think about it in a way that how do we create a company full of advocates for the brand? And I think the second that you make that switch, it becomes a lot easier to create an environment where people want to do it for themselves as opposed to feeling like forced. I don't know about anyone else, but if someone tells me to do something, I just immediately don't want to do it. Whereas if someone creates an environment for me to want to do it for myself, I'm so much more invested in it. And I feel like I'm valued even more as an employee because I'm being trusted to be a very, very public advocate for the brand. And I think that it has like a double dynamic of creating this culture of trust where employees can like flourish, I guess, in a new way. And I think we're also starting to see almost like a bit of a reward scheme. So companies like identifying people that could be kind of like a bit of a fast track to leadership when they're doing something like this, because they're taking their own network and reputation management into their own hands, essentially. And I think that smart employers will identify those people very quickly and kind of like put them on like, I guess like some kind of like training or platform or investing in their learning and development in some way and start investing in those people, because the thing that all brands are in the market of is attention. And I think anyone in your company that is putting in an intentional effort to increase that attention and eyeballs on your brand, I think they should be rewarded in some way.
I so agree with what you said. I just wanted to give a shout out actually to a company that I think this does really well, is Rob Sandback at Indie Spring, which is an app development agency. Aaron Kirkup is one of his lead staff members. Can't remember his actual title, but I've worked with Aaron in the account management side. I think he's doing more biz dev now, but they have a fantastic culture. And your point about how do we create an environment where people want to advocate for us is the right way of thinking about it. That's a completely different way of thinking about it. And I think Rob does that. And the interesting thing is he recently hired a new person, Tom, and Tom posted on LinkedIn that he was really excited about joining the company. He got so many comments. I was so blown away. So what agency owners need to think about is that new hires are also bringing their existing relationships to the company, aren't they? So there's that real benefit if someone has got an already really good reputation and got a lot of relationships. Gosh, so many more questions. For those listening, when do you think, Claudia, that this is not appropriate? Like, if you hit this criteria, or if if your company's like this, or let's talk about agency specifically, when should you think twice about it? Is there ever a time when this wouldn't work?
I think for me, it always has to be a case of what you're talking about publicly is actually what is happening in real life. And I think that, to be completely honest, I don't think there's any situation where it's not fine for an agency to do this. I think all agencies should be thinking about this in some way. I think there's always an elephant in the room of what if someone builds this really big audience, they're really attached to the brand, and then they leave. And I think that is a question that comes up so often when I'm talking about this, especially to bigger companies, is like, oh, we've invested all this time, energy, and effort into someone. They're very publicly associated with the brand, and then they take that audience and their whole network with them. And my answer is always, people are going to leave anyway. And I think that you might as well invest in them in the hope that they will stay, in the hope that they will bring all the attention that they can to your brand and like publicly create a positive reputation. Because for me as well, like, people can see when it's real and when it's not, and when it's a company that's like investing in them because they want them to be successful, or investing in them because they just want the followers and they want the likes and they want the engagement. And I think that there's such a big conversation about authenticity, but people aren't stupid. And I think they can tell when it's just for likes and followers and impressions, versus when a company has created a culture that someone really, really wants to be a part of. And even when they share that someone is leaving, the way that they share that and the way that they communicate that is obvious, in my opinion. And I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but I think that you can tell when someone is like genuinely invested in someone's future being successful as a part of that business or not a part of that business, versus someone that feels like they've just been kind of like peddled and pushed out as a face, just for the attention. And I think that I understand that being a concern of employers, that we've put all this energy and effort and time into someone and they take that audience to somewhere else. But I think that will always be the nature of agencies. People still have a network and a reputation, whether it's public or not, that they will take to somewhere else if they do choose to leave.
I think this is worth talking about for a moment, because primarily we have a lot of account managers listening to this, and obviously agency owners, mostly in the US, to be honest. 65% of my listeners are in the US, interestingly.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, but what I was going to say was the point about relationships is key, because an account manager primarily is responsible. They're the ambassador for the agency. They are the ones that is sort of deepening client relationships. So I can understand why an agency owner might be thinking, hang on a minute, if they go somewhere else, they're going to take all my lovely clients with them. because they're kind of every time they're showing up publicly, as well as those one-on-one interactions with clients, they're reinforcing their relationship, they're driving that relationship forward. So do you, as well as what you've said, do you have any words of kind of reassurance other than they're going to leave anyway? It's just the nature of the, because I'm thinking to myself, I call it an ambassador program when you're working with account managers, with your clients, to make sure that you have multiple touch points at your client companies. That's something that I would offer up as to mitigate the risk of putting all of your eggs in one basket. You still have to maintain. I'd probably, like you do, Claudia, it'd be interesting how you split your relationships and how you keep a touch point. So do you want to talk a little bit to that point?
Yeah, and I think that you're absolutely right. There is an element of de-risking these type of programs. The more people do it, the more touch points you have with a client, the different people in the team they can build their relationship with. Even at Great Influence, we're a team of 5. A client typically works with 3 people at 3 different levels. And I think we all have a different relationship with that client. So if one person leaves, there's still other elements of different relationships that are strong. And I think it has to be that, really. And I think that by one person being a very, very public face of the brand, it's a good thing because you're still bringing attention to the brand in a new way. By 4, 5, 10 people being the face of a brand, you get, what I think is interesting about that as well is like you get different versions of the business and you get different ways that people can interact and engage with. And I think for me, when it comes to me personally building relationships with clients, I guess you have the like back office and front office. Like back office is like the work that you do, the quality of work that you deliver, the kind of like way that you're able to build their network and your network, the way that you play a role as a connector to other people that might be relevant and helpful, the behind the scenes stuff. And then I think you almost have like front office, so the way that they communicate with you publicly. And I feel very, very lucky that I absolutely love all the clients that we work with. I feel like I have a really close relationship and genuine relationship with all of them. And I think that is also built on publicly through all of us sharing our ideas online, because you can see that it's genuine. Like I know that the conversations we're having behind the scenes are exactly the same conversations that we're having on social. The things that they're posting are things that we've spoken about in real life. And I think it just actually adds a layer of like closeness. I want to mention actually Claire Heaviside, who runs an amazing agency in Manchester, Serotonin. Yeah, she's so great. And I think that she's someone in particular that everything back office is exactly the same as front office. Like what you see is what you get. She's so genuine in the conversations that we have behind the scenes, and then what she shares publicly is exactly the same thing. And I think that actually having that almost like 2 sides of the coin to someone does create those closer relationships, because you can see how authentic and genuine that they're being.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you gave a shout out to Claire, because she's so lovely. And talking about authenticity, I think it's so, so true. And it is reflected in the engagement from people that you know. I'm just conscious of time, but I want to ask you a few more questions, Claudia, now I've got you. I'm interested because you talk to so many brands and companies and employees. At the moment, particularly if we focus on the agency space, there's a lot of uncertainty around the future of agencies, particularly given we've got things like AI coming up, and meaning that we can do things a lot quicker, which is interrupting and disrupting the pricing model, and also in an agency's owner's perspective in hiring more people when actually we can be a lot more efficient. So given that kind of environment, do you have any thoughts on where we're going as an agency industry as it relates to personal branding?
I think that's a really interesting question. The first thought that comes into my head about like, I guess agency world becoming a bit more competitive is that it feels more important than ever to have a personal brand as someone who is in the marketing and agency world, because it's no secret that we're all in the business of attention. And I think that the way that we're trying to build that through brand channels is one avenue, and we're creating campaigns to get more eyeballs on products and things that we've worked on, etc. A new and, in my mind, innovative way that people can still bring attention to the work that they're doing is through their own personal brand and how they're showing up on social. And I think that if things do become more competitive, it will be the people that can bring a new and their own owned audience to something that are going to win out in those scenarios. And I think for me, I'm very much thinking about how I embed AI into the ways that I'm working. And I think personal branding will absolutely be affected by the implementation of new tech, and content is shifting, design is shifting. I don't think people should underestimate how big of a change we're already in the midst of. And I think that I could either think about this as I feel scared and nervous about how AI is going to disrupt my job and what I do and the way that we work and agencies work and the clients that we have, etc. Or I can think about how I quickly become as expert as I possibly can in adopting this and getting it to help me do my job even better. And I think, again, on a double level, I'm thinking about how I embed it into work, but I'm also thinking about how I can use it to make my own personal brand better. And it's exactly what you said there. It's how do I use it to make it more efficient? And again, anyone in agency world hopefully is starting at least to embed AI into the ways that they're working. And you can do that with personal brand. And I think the thing that I would use AI to do is to create the kind of springboard for ideas. So I think, again, one of the most common questions I always get is what do I say? Where do I start? And I would work backwards. So I would think about, we discussed before about understanding exactly what the goal is for the business. If that is client pipeline, I would use the client avatar that you have, put that into ChatGPT and say, give me all of the problems or challenges that this person could have in agency world. I would then look at the business and the services that you offer, and I would understand exactly how the business can solve the problems of the avatar that you have. And I would use ChatGPT to create a list of all those challenges and problems, and then I would match exactly how the business solved those problems, and I would talk about that publicly. And I would use AI to speed that entire process up. And I think the second that people can start to use it as a tool to kind of understand how they need to show up and make those workflows more efficient, because I do think personal branding very quickly falls to the bottom of a to-do list because people are nervous around it. For one, they don't feel confident doing it and they can't see the immediate value. But I think if you can speed up that process and create a system that means that you can do it quickly, efficiently, but also really, really well. And I think keep it as long as you can near the top of your to-do list, because I'm thinking about my career in 1 to 5 years time. And I want to be in the best position that I can possibly be in. When AI and the robots start to take over, I'm going to be up there. So I think that people should start to think about how they can create a system that means that they don't fail, as opposed to just, it falls to the bottom of the to-do list because I don't feel confident with it right now. Not sure if that answers your question, and again, a bit of a rant, but...
I love your rants, Claudia, and we're going to use that as a soundbite, actually, because I think that tip there about using AI as a springboard for ideas and breaking it down into, the goal, the avatar, and then problems and challenges and how your services map. I think that I'm going to take that as a soundbite because that's, a lot of people can do that so easily. You can start now. I just, for those listening that perhaps are on this journey, that are an agency owner, what's working now? Obviously, I see you on LinkedIn, but would you still say that that's the right channel to be if you're a digital marketing agency? Are there any other tips or thoughts around what people should be doing and where they should be?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn for me will always be the most effective channel in terms of exactly who your audience are. They're in the kind of marketing business mindset. It's other people looking for connections, professional connections, I would say. It's a very much more condensed area in that sense. I think video already is one of the most important things that anyone could do, and a skill to get good at fast for me would be speaking on camera and being able to get your point across in a really concise way, and that also is engaging. And I think that skill is so transferable into so many things, and something that I've been doing for a couple of years, and it's definitely bled into all of my other work. The way that I communicate with clients, the way that I'm able to just have an idea or something in the back of my head that I've spoken about in a video that I can then bring into a presentation or when I'm speaking to someone has been so, so valuable. I do think that there will be an element of how do you build a deeper connection. And I think community is such a big conversation. We don't need to get into that. But I think the way that that's shifting is that social media almost feels a bit like surface level. It's 100% still valuable. It's 100% still worth investing in. But I think if I was looking to build deeper connections and I already had social kind of on lock in some element, I'd be thinking about how do I go deeper, whether not necessarily a podcast, but whether it's a Substack, YouTube, a different way that people can get to know the brand and get to know the team and get to know you. Because I think that what I find really interesting, and again, I posted a video about this, is not that I think brand channels will die, but I think they're changing and that people want more information and they want it in new ways and they want to be able to, that's why I think it's so valuable for 5-10 people in a business to start building their personal brands, because you get 10 different versions of the story. And for me, the deepest connections come from like building a picture in your own mind of how something is made up. I definitely think LinkedIn will be a really valuable platform. Video will continue to be extremely important. And I think that aiming to build deeper connections, whether that's messaging someone behind the scenes or using a platform that allows for people to go down that rabbit hole a bit further, will be really valuable.
Amazing. Claudia, this has been a bit of a masterclass, I think, in personal branding. Is there any question that I didn't ask you, or any tip that you can share that we didn't talk about that you think might be useful for either an agency owner or an account manager listening?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think if you're in the very, very early phases of doing this and you're kind of on the fence of knowing that you need to do it, but not really sure where to start, I always think about what you can do rather than what you can say, because I think that creates like an environment where you feel like it's not necessarily about like your ideas, which is much harder when you're starting out to kind of get a grip on. And I think that if you can set yourself a challenge, or you can talk about things that are happening around you, be really conscious of what you're doing and talk about that as a place to start, is a lot easier than thinking about what's an idea that I can put out into the world that is different and unique. And because I think we tie so much value to what people think about our ideas, whereas we do it on Instagram, we post what we're doing as a personal thing. So I think starting there just creates a bit more of a safer entry point for me.
And people are doing some fantastic things, aren't they? They're going to events.
Exactly.
They're working with fabulous clients. So create some content around what you're doing. I love that. Love that. For those listening, Claudia, that want to go a bit deeper with you and talk to you, but perhaps about working together, what kind of people would you like to hear from, and what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, so we typically work with founders, startup and scale up businesses, everything from agency owners to FMCG, fashion, retail. So please connect with me on LinkedIn, Claudia Cardinali, or drop me an email at claudia@greatinfluence.co.uk.
Amazing. Claudia, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was great. All good.